How would you like to get along with everyone better, even if they're difficult? You've got someone in your mind as I say that. The question is, how can we get along with and work with anyone, even if they're difficult? Welcome to a very special episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast, which is a recording from our Virtual Leader Con event. You can learn more about Virtual Leader Con at virtualleadercon.com. But for now, let me introduce our guest and get into this week's episode. Amy Gallo is a workplace expert who writes, speaks about gender, interpersonal dynamics, difficult conversations, feedback, effective communication, and more. She works with individuals and teams to help them better collaborate, communicate, and transform their culture in many ways. She's the author of 2 books, The HBR Guide to Dealing with Conflict, and what we're talking about in this episode, Getting Along, How to Work with Anyone, Even Difficult People. She's written hundreds of articles for Harvard Business Review, where she is a contributing editor. Her writing has been collected in numerous books, including ones on feedback, emotional intelligence, and managing others. For the past 3 years, Amy has co-hosted HBR's Women at Work podcast, which examines the struggles and successes of women in the workplace. She is taught at Brown University and Penn and is a graduate of both Brown and Yale. And with that, let's get on to my conversation with Amy Gallo. Here's something that Amy wrote that is related to what she was just saying that I want to share with you all. So it goes like this: social connections are a predictor of cognitive function. In other words, we get smarter. Predictor of cognitive functioning, resilience, and engagement. We know that teams of friends perform better, that people with supportive coworkers report less stress, that being close with colleagues increases information and idea sharing, self-confidence, and learning, and that workers in mundane jobs are just as likely to feel satisfied and fulfilled as those with inspiring jobs if they invest in social connection.
Right.
But
Wait, can I just tell you, because we'll get to the but I have to tell you, one of my favorite pieces of research I came across in working on this book was that I think it was a team at Rutgers showed people who say they have a friend at work, like even a best friend at work, actually those 2 people tend to have better performance reviews, right? And so like it is just so concrete. It's not just about engagement or satisfaction, but it's actually about performance at work as well. Okay, we can get to that.
And we can go right down the line, because if we have a better relationship, we will assume positive intent, and we're less likely to be the difficult person with the other person, at least for very long. And we can go right on down. Like communication will likely be better, so it'll be less rework. We could go right on down, but that's not why we're here. Everyone's here because they want to learn how to work with people, even the difficult ones. That's why they came, right? So we're going to get there. So what are the specific problems? So I'm going to flip this around now. We said, yeah, the positive stuff's good. What's the problem with the negative relationship piece?
Yeah. I probably don't have to tell those watching and listening what the problem is. If they have that person in mind that you suggested they have in mind earlier, right? They immediately probably feel the signs of stress, right? Your heart rate goes up. You, start to feel tense. Maybe your palms get sweaty. That's my sort of tell for when I feel stress. It just causes us anxiety, stress, upset. We lose sleep. We get distracted. We're not focused on work. We spend our time and energy dealing with that relationship as opposed to doing the things that we're supposed to be doing at work. Now, the other thing that is really detrimental is that being focused on that one relationship, because most of us have at least one person we find annoying at work, but being focused on that also detracts from the positive relationship, because your focus, because of our negativity bias, our focus comes on that person, on that relationship, as opposed to all of the positive relationships that we have. And typically, most of us have more positive or at least neutral relationships with coworkers than we do negative, but we become very focused.
Well, yes, it kind of goes back to the negativity bias in all parts of our lives. It's like that's the one that tends to take center stage, et cetera, et cetera. And so there's a couple things you've already mentioned that sometimes we're that person, right? There's a couple of things about us that I want to talk about. I want to read something else that you wrote that I think is absolutely brilliant. I want to say do that. And then in a minute, we're going to get to these types of people, and we're going to let people do some voting. We're going to have some fun with that. But before we get there, I want to read this because this is about what we're doing when we're seeing this quote unquote bad behavior from the other person, right? So I want you all to listen to this as yourself. We quickly tell ourselves a story about what's occurring, why it's occurring, and what will happen next. And these stories, laden with emotions and critiques, feel truthful to us, even though they're based on our brain's sense-making attempts rather than on facts. It's what psychologists call premature cognitive commitment. Was what my dad said. You already decided.
That's right.
That was my part. That wasn't Amy. In the effort to conserve resources, our brains make snap judgments about what's going on and how we should react. And now me again. And once we've decided that, it's over.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, because we commit, right? We commit to, like your dad said, we've already made our decision about how this is. And typically the story we tell ourselves portrays ourselves as the hero or the victim, and the other person as the villain, right? And so
it's not me. They're the problem, Amy.
Right. And of course, I want to acknowledge there's some people whose story is always, oh, I did something wrong, which also is incorrect, right? You're starting to pit yourself against one another. You're getting into this me versus them dynamic. Who's right, who's wrong? That's not going to get you very far. If you want to actually get along with this person or feel less stress when interacting with them, having this really polarized view of their behavior is inappropriate, mine is fine, or they don't know how to work in an environment like this, and I do, right? That's not going to help you. I do want you to have eyes wide open about their behavior and not fool yourself, but you need to change the story. And usually the first story you tell yourself is just not accurate. So you have to question it constantly. What assumptions am I making? How might I be wrong? Right? Anything that sort of helps you to see the situation from a different perspective.
I'm going to say something about that in a second, but it sounds like Lisa has to leave for a meeting. So, and someone is telling her, to not do her job and actually stay here. But Lisa, if you're still here, you're getting a copy of the book. If you have to go to your meeting, at least you get a copy of the book. And hopefully Lisa is still here. If you are, Lisa, immediately send an email to info@virtualleadercon.com. And I'm going to write Lisa K on here. So if she's not, we can get back to her. You can say it's me, Kevin. I know Lisa K. All right. So Tamara, you or Lisa needs to get this because this is Lisa's book. Okay. Now I want to say something about what you were just saying. Yes, Lisa, you won. You won. Can I pretend to go to a meeting? Life is about choices, Marcy. Do whatever you want. Okay. So you made a really important point. And so I'm going to tell you what I coach people to do. Tell me what you think. She muted this session. Okay. Awesome. You muted us or you muted the meeting? That's what I want to know, Lisa. You might be the difficult person, right? Lisa, just saying, well, she's multitasking during the meeting. So what I often do when I'm coaching others or try to do for myself is, okay, what are the possible reasons why this person did this?
Yes.
Like the first one is the one that I immediately went to.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. I'm likely never going to know why. But if I can come up with 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 possible, plausible reasons, then I go to, okay, first of all, some of those are neutral. And some of those may even have positive intent. But then I can say, what could I do now based on what, I don't know which one it is, but it could be any of those. And rather than saying, well, it's clearly this.
Yeah. Well, and what I love, there's empathy involved in that, right? Because you have to put yourself in that person's shoes. Why would they behave? And I often try to ask myself, okay, what would a rational person who's doing what they do, what would be the explanation? Because the other thing we do when we tell ourselves those stories is we label these people as incompetent, difficult, and we can talk about the label difficult, right? But we really try to sort of separate ourselves from them. And what you're talking about is actually trying to put yourself in their shoes, trying to see their perspective so that you can come up with, like you said, many explanations for why the behavior is the way it is, why they're doing what they're doing. And that's each of the chapters that talk about these types of people in the book, and we'll get to the types in a minute, I know, but I start by saying what motivates this behavior, because I don't want to, it would be lovely to just be like, well, this behavior is completely inappropriate and unacceptable, and that's it. But that's not the reality, right? Like, we've all acted like the know-it-all at times. We've all behaved passive aggressively at times. So there could be a very rational explanation, even if there isn't, even if the explanation is they're mean spirited, they're out to get me, they're evil. Like, even if that's the truth, we can debate what that means, but even if that's the truth, going in with that assumption isn't going to help you change the dynamic in any way.
Exactly. I love the fact that you even start with the word rational, because sometimes the story we made is they're not freaking rational, right?
Yeah.
So I've apparently decided that I'm going to reward behavior that I never like, which is people ignoring their meetings. So Rachel, you're going to also get a copy of the book. Rachel, you get the next copy of the book. I've got one more to give away after this. But Rachel, info@virtualleadercon.com is where you've got to put your mailing address so we can mail it to you. Okay. So I want to get to this idea of labeling difficult people in a second, but before we go there, one other thing about us. You have a short little piece in the book which is incredibly valuable. You use a phrase that I want you to talk about, and it's cleaning up your own side of the street. Talk about that for a second.
Yeah. So this is actually a term that came from a friend who was struggling. She had a teenage son who was really struggling and was getting some professional help. And the professionals who were helping him said to my friend, his parents, said, you need to clean, while he's working on himself, which obviously he needs to do, you need to clean up your side of the street. And what they meant by that was, when you come to this interaction, which is fraught with your son, and this I think applies absolutely with anyone in your life, you need to be sure you have the self-awareness. You're making sure you're not sort of showing up with all your garbage. You're not contributing in a real negative way to the dynamic. Instead, you're showing up ready to work on yourself, ready to work on the dynamic, ready to be present and focused. And that is really a lot of what I talk about in the book. And, it's not comfortable, but I'm really calling on people to be the adult in the room and to take care of themselves so that they can be the one to sort of role model, and lay the groundwork for a positive relationship with this person who may not be doing the same work. That's the other thing. You may do all that work. You may try all of these tactics, and that person may do nothing, right? They may just do the same behavior.
But the reality is we have cleaning up our side of the street is in our control. The team is saying, the group is saying, and yes, Carolyn did use that phrase yesterday. So that's another reason, Amy, why we need to connect you with Carolyn.
For sure.
So no doubt, right? But I wanted to call it out here as we get ready to go in. So now there are 8 archetypes, and Marissa is going to there's 8. There's also like 6 questions that people are asking, but I have to keep control for a couple more minutes, everybody. So the poll is up. There are 8 archetypes in there, so they now have all 8 of them, Amy. And so you have a minute or so to vote on the one that you'd most like us to talk about, and then Marissa is going to tell me what the right answer is, or what we're going to pick on in a second, while Amy and I talk about this point. The book says difficult people. Is it the person or is it the behavior?
Oh, it's funny. We went back and forth on the difficult people. My editor and I had endless conversations about this, because I sort of wanted to put difficult because it's in the subtitle, in quotes. But we felt like, because I think all of us are difficult at times, right? I've made that point multiple times. And I do worry that people use that label, and actually will use any of the archetype labels, to really pigeonhole someone, to mistreat,
as opposed to what they're doing.
Exactly. The reason I use the archetypes is because, not as a way to say, oh God, this person is a pessimist, I'm done with them, right? Or this person's a political operator, I want nothing to do with them. No, it's to make sure that you can find the tactics you need to deal with the specific behavior you're dealing with. So you use the archetypes to say, okay, who am I dealing with? Is this an insecure boss? Is this a biased colleague? Right? Okay, now I can find the tactics I need to address specifically that behavior. Because one of the things I've found in a lot of the books, there's some wonderful, wonderful books obviously out there about dealing with difficult people, but often the assumption is that the same general tactics will work no matter who you're dealing with. But what you'll do with an insecure boss is very different than what you would do with a passive aggressive peer.
So
Right?
two things. One is, everybody that we've been around, we've been talking about models, and this is what she's saying is these are some models. They're not perfection. They're ways to give us a place to work from to help us move in that direction, right? So,
Yeah.
Marissa, since there's probably a way for me to know about the poll, let me see if I'm smart enough to figure this out.
And actually, while you're figuring out, I want to make one other point about the difficult label, which is that, and I think someone is saying this in the chat, right? Is that you sometimes difficult is also it's a biased laden term, right? So sometimes we'll say someone's difficult when we really mean they're not like me or they're not doing what I want them to do, right? And I think that we have to be really careful about using that label in a pejorative way. Again, it's to sort of help people find the advice that they need.
All right. Marissa has spoken, which means the group has spoken. Even though Marina was politically trying to get insecure boss to win, the winner apparently is the passive aggressive peer. So Amy, that's the archetype. Give us some help with that person.
Yeah. I'm not surprised this one got voted. This actually was the archetype that inspired the book, because when I wrote my first book about dealing with conflict, I still, actually, this still happens whenever I do a talk or a workshop. Inevitably, I can guarantee that the first, second, or third question in the Q&A will be about how to deal with passive aggressive behavior, because it is so frustrating, right? It feels like shadow boxing. You're like, what's wrong? Nothing's wrong. Like, you're just like, how do I land here, right? A couple things to know about the passive aggressive person. Number one, it feels very mean spirited often, or very manipulative. But typically it's not motivated by a desire to hurt you or to upset you, or even to sort of help themselves. It's usually motivated by fear, and it's fear of direct conflict. So maybe they have not been given the skills to express themselves directly and honestly, or maybe they are from a culture where that's not honored or respected, right? It might be fear of rejection. So if I actually put my thoughts out there or say, no, I don't want to do this, right, I'm going to be rejected by you. Or fear of failure, right? If I share my idea directly, then it's going to not succeed, and I will be the one on the hook. Also, passive aggressive behavior is often used by people who are outside the typical power structure. So being able to say honestly and directly what you think and feel, it typically requires you to have some sort of power. And so oftentimes what we see is people who are underestimated in an organization or underrepresented will resort to passive aggressive behavior because it's the only way they can get what they want or express what they need. So that's just to give you a little bit of context for why we might resort to this. And I know I think about the ways I behave passive aggressively, let's say in my marriage or with my teenage daughter, right? It's because I don't feel power. I don't have the power to make them do what I want. And so I instead am using this other behavior. So what do we do with that behavior? This is one of the trickiest ones to address. But I will say, if as much as possible, if you can try to focus on the underlying message. So what are they actually trying to say? Now, it might be wrapped up in a snarky comment or in with an eye roll, right? But what actually are they trying to say? And can you give them the safety? Can you give them the psychological safety to be able to express that more directly?
go back to one of the first things you said. One of the root causes is they feel powerless. They feel afraid.
Mhm.
And so if we can give them that, we can get them past that. And in some cases, if we can help them get past the habit, right? Someone said, can we just blame our parents? Meaning, like, sometimes that's just what they do. They might not even know they're doing it.
They might not even know. That's exactly right. And sometimes I've in my personal life, I've dealt with passive aggressive people where I've worked up the courage to be like, you're being very passive aggressive, which I don't recommend, by the way. That label, no one is like, oh, thank you for pointing that out, right? But I worked up the courage to tell this close friend of mine that she was behaving passive aggressively, and she was dumbfounded. She was just like, what? And I explained, you said this and then did this, but you said this and I really think you meant this. And she was like, I had no idea I was doing that. And I think that that's really, you have to remember that is they often don't even know that they're doing it. And so instead of saying you're behaving passive aggressively, please stop, which I'm guessing will not be productive. Maybe it will, but most likely not.
Let's just stop you just for 1 second. That takes us
Yeah,
back to, we've made this decision. That eye roll meant this.
that's right. Right. And you can say, pave the way, say, I get the sense that not everyone in the room's happy with this decision. Is there, anyone want to share a difference of opinion? And you might even pave the way by saying, you know what, I'm of two minds on it too. Here's what I'm worried about. Is anyone else also worried about that? Right. Trying to give them the safety to actually express their opinion. Or is this oftentimes someone who's passive aggressive may not feel comfortable speaking up directly in a meeting? Can you give them different ways to express their opinion? Set up an anonymous Google form where people can put in their thoughts on the proposal you just put out, instead of assuming that silence is agreement on moving forward. Actually take a poll, an anonymous poll. Is everyone comfortable with moving forward with this? Now, sometimes that does not always work, and you do need a little bit more nudging. In that case, I really recommend establishing team norms. Very few teams actually have an open, direct discussion about how they're going to handle conflicts or disagreements. And I just think ahead of time, exactly. And we assume that people are just going to, they'll know how to do this, right? But I don't know about you. No one ever sat me down and was like, here's how you disagree in a productive way, right? That's just not a life skill that we're very conscientiously teaching people. I believe we should be, but so instead, saying as a team, here's what we do when we disagree. We're gonna speak up. We're gonna acknowledge that disagreement isn't a bad thing. That's an important part of doing work. When someone actually expresses a dissenting opinion, we're going to applaud them. We're going to thank them. We're going to consider it, right? And then maybe at some point we're going to have to disagree and then commit so we can move forward. But as a team, this is what we want to agree to do. And that often can help that passive aggressive person, or the person who's displaying the passive aggressive behavior, and give them an outlet for their opinions, for their thoughts, for their viewpoints on whatever you all are working on together.
So, Amy, since you haven't been with us all day, and some of these people have been with us all day, in the last session, we were talking, among other things, about iMessages. You do this, and this is how it makes me, how I feel. Tamara said, this goes back to iMessages, which is absolutely right. If you want to, you're nodding. Anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the with any of the archetypes that in the book, one of the things that you can really help people do is raise the self-awareness of their self-awareness around the impact their behavior is having on you. So let's stick with the passive aggressive person. So when you say, you might go to your colleague and say, you told me you wanted to be involved in this project. I've invited you to every meeting. You're not showing up. And let me, stating facts that can't be disagreed with, right? You didn't show up to 3 meetings. You said you wanted to be involved in the project. Not having you involved is leaving me to do the work, and it's really causing me stress. What can we do about that, right? So really focusing on what the impact is on you of their behavior. That you might have had someone talk before about the situation, behavior, impact, feedback model. And I think, you explain the situation, in the meeting and the behavior. You interrupted me 3 times, the impact, it made me feel like he didn't value my opinion. Now, I like to also add, I know that's probably not your intention, but that's how it's making me feel. Because that helps to take in, because what people hear when you give them feedback like you made me feel not valued, they're what they hear is I'm a bad person. So if you can sort of take the intention away from the impact, like I know you didn't mean, I know that's probably not what you intended, but that's how it was received. That can help as well.
Sandy said something related when she said, "Did you mean to imply?" Or same idea. So
Yeah.
Tamara, for the connection to the I language, you get the third copy. Tamara gets a copy of the brand new book, Getting Along: How to Work with Anyone, Even Difficult People. There you go. So all kinds of questions, exactly what I expected. Everyone's going to say, "Why didn't you have Amy longer?" I knew that was going to happen before we even started. So sorry, everybody, for that. I'm going to go ask your questions here right now. I haven't even looked at them. So here we go. Let's see. Tamara asked, and other people voted it to the top of the list, how do you work with people who thrive on drama and it's rarely healthy for the team? You've worked so hard to build up trust and improve culture.
Yeah.
What do you do?
Yeah. So 2 things. One, disengage from the drama as much as you can. Now, that because drama really feeds on drama. So when someone starts to behave in a way or that's creating sort of noise in the system, either they're gossiping or they're rolling their eyes at a meeting, like they love the drama. The more you can ignore that behavior, the better. That means don't you either if as long as you're sort of in cahoots with everyone else and you just sort of choose to say we're not going to engage with that, right? You're not feeding into it. A lot of times it'll fizzle out because they realize it's not a productive behavior. Oftentimes, even if you're directly addressing it and saying I wish you wouldn't do that, that feeds the drama even further. Now, and there does come a point at which sometimes you have to say, please stop coming to me with gossip. It's not helppful. Or I don't feel the same way. I actually think the team is working really well together. Whatever counter statement you need to make, but as much as you can disengage and just show you're not interested in that, and role model for others who also probably don't want to be drawn into the drama. Because the worst is you disengage and everyone else is spinning out over there, right? It's going to be really hard to stay out of the fray. That's number one. Number two, again, I go back to team norms. And when I talk about team norms, I want to make clear you don't have to be the most senior person on the team to establish those norms. I've been on teams where someone who wasn't the leader said, I think we should really talk about how we interact with one another and what we expect from one another. And you can do that at any level.
Two things about that, everybody. Number one is if you're forming a new team, you can make it a part of your process, part of your culture to have that conversation when you're forming a project team, number one, which is a great strategy. But the other thing is what we're talking about here, team norms, ground rules, whatever you want to call it, is fundamentally intentionally creating culture. And it's incredibly valuable. The idea of doing it's been around forever. It's been lost by many people, and it's very, very valuable. It's incredibly valuable.
Can I say one other thing about
Please.
drama? Because I think the other issue is that even if we don't actively do something like respond to the gossip or contribute to the gossip or I do think there's ways in which, because we inherently become competitive with people who are doing things that we don't approve of, right? Because we don't want their way to win. And that subtle tension between you and another person can be very rewarding to this person who thrives on drama, because they're like, oh yeah, like Amy wants to show me I'm all wrong, but look, I'm actually succeeding by stirring the pot, right?
Yep.
And so the more you can just sort of, and I mean mentally disengage of like, that's how they choose to act. Here's how I'm going to choose to act, which is aligned with my values, right? That just doesn't give them as much fuel for their behavior. right? No action is a response, right? I love that, Michelle. I think that's a really smart response.
There's something else that you just said that is connected to other things that have happened today that I think is useful, and that is basically that person is changing the game. They're trying to win a different game. And so if we get out of trying to win and stay focused on what's really happening here, we got a better chance as well. Because when we feed it, there's a game in their head that they have the chance to win. And now it's about winning the game and not getting the results or solving the problem or whatever else it might be. Even if they don't know it, even if they don't, it's not intentional. Again, assume neutral intent.
That's right.
Who knows? Like, that's just what's happening. There's 100 questions. Well, there's not 100. There's a bunch of questions that we're not going to get to, everybody. I'm sorry. Why? Because I have a couple of questions that I want to ask, and I'm going to ask them. And because this is also going to eventually be in a Remarkable Leadership podcast, there's a question I pretty much always ask there that I want to ask here. And I'm going to ask it next, Amy. And usually I tell people ahead of time I'm going to ask it. So you have to work without a net on this. I think you're going to be safe. Okay. Here's the question I have all of my guests on the Remarkable Leadership podcast. So if you're listening to this on the podcast later, I haven't forgotten. Amy, what are you reading these days?
Oh gosh, that is a great question. So I'm looking at my bookshelf. So first of all, I'm reading a novel called Truth by Hernan Diaz. So far, it's actually in 4 parts. The first part is about this man who sort of accumulates wealth right before the Great Depression. It's really riveting. I know that doesn't sound riveting, but it's really riveting to just hear his sort of story of how he built this life. And I don't actually know what's going to happen. It's one of those books where I go in and I'm like, I don't know where this is going. So I love to read fiction. So that's one. There's another, and I'm not going to remember the full title. Actually, can I look it up? Because I think I want to make sure people know it's about boundaries. And I actually came across this book in researching my book. Nedra Tawwab is the name of the author, and it's called Set Boundaries, Find Peace, A Guide to Reclaiming Yourself.
Set boundaries, find peace.
That's right. Which is so relevant, right, to my book about and dealing with difficult people. Is like, because sometimes thank you for the link. Sometimes you're not going to be able to change the other person. You're not going to be able to nudge the relationship into a positive one. And then it's time to set boundaries. And how do you do that? And her advice in that book, I'm about halfway through it. And her advice in that book, I've been using it daily in my interactions with everything from my family to my coworkers, even to neighbors, right? It's just the way to sort of protect yourself mentally. And it's not because they're necessarily difficult, but it's just about, am I watching out for myself in all of these interactions? Because many of us, especially I would say many women, are really socialized to give so much of ourselves that we lose sight of what we need. And that can be so detrimental, not only to yourself, but to your relationships. And so it's I can't recommend it enough. It's a great, great, great book.
Set boundaries, find peace, and truth. Both of those, for those of you who listen to the podcast, you'll have links to those in the show notes, and you've seen one of them already here on virtual LeaderCon. So, Amy, I have one more question I've been asking everybody here, and because this community is here to learn, and so my question for you is, what is one thing you've learned about learning?
Oh gosh, yeah, this is a good question. So I'm going to say 2 things. You said one thing, but I'm going to because one's very simple, and that is just the sort of growth mindset. It's funny. I think I intuitively knew this, but my daughter's school has been really good about training them to have a growth mindset, which is that you can learn even when you're frustrated, knowing that you will make mistakes, but you will grow as a person. I think is just such an invaluable thing. The other thing about learning, I'm really I still struggle with is the experimentation aspect of it, right? Like I want this linear path. I like take the course, I read the book, and yet it's really about sort of filling your toolbox with different tools, trying them out. What works in one situation? Being in the business of giving advice, sometimes too often my answer is it depends. And I think that's so true, is that so much of the advice people put out there, including my book, really depends on the context and the situation. So what we can say about learning is experiment along the way, reflect on what worked, what didn't, try something else. And sometimes the most frustrating thing is a tactic will work, and then 5 months later it stops working. So you got to go back. Okay, now I'm going to keep, I have to sort of keep reassessing, refreshing the approaches I use.
Or did I backslide? I'm not really doing it the way I used to do it. Or did it not work this time with this person, but it might now work another 612 more times? All that we have to think about, right?
That's right.
Amy,
That's right.
I knew before you got here that we were going to want you to be here longer. And maybe that's the best feedback I could give you. Everybody, time to give some feedback to Miss Amy. There they go. And you all know the drill. Those of you that are here at Virtual LeaderCon, if you can fill out the two-question poll, we would appreciate that. And for those of you who are listening or watching this on the Remarkable Leadership Podcast, thanks for putting up with us being a part of Virtual LeaderCon, and know that next year you're going to go to Virtual LeaderCon, or you want to just go to virtualleadercon.com now and check out what this was all about.